Accelerate your speed through refactoring to custom primitives, part of the Clear Measure way.
You are programming with Palermo. You deliver software. You need to move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence. Stay tuned for timeless solutions, simple methods, and topics that will propel you forward. And now your host, lifelong programmer, author, teacher, coach, Christian, and charismatic speaker, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to Programming with Palermo. Today we are talking about increasing your pace, accelerating your speed through refactoring, one of the engineering practices in the Clear Measure way. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about refactoring logic into custom primitives and taking logic that might be on the outside of your application or maybe in multiple places in the user interface or exports, and actually refactoring that into the core object model. And in this case, we're going to be talking about taking a decimal and creating a custom decimal primitive where regardless of where that object goes, regardless of where that value goes, we get a chance to alter what it means to be a decimal in our application. So let's get into it here on Programming with Palermo. So let's talk about an example of refactoring into the type system. One of the engineering practices in order to accelerate your speed when using the Clear Measure way. We've already got quality, we already have stability running in production, and now we want to have the team start to move faster, is to deepen our use of object-oriented programming and specifically to bake concepts into our objects and deep down into the type system. And so we're going to refactor this. So imagine the scenario where we have a decimal in various places and we're reading data from a decimal source that's coming from another database or data files or whatnot. And especially in relational databases where you specify a precision and say there's 6 decimal places. If we read that data straight into decimals and then we use it, then I'm gonna run this test. What we get is 8.230000 anytime we print it out to any kind of user interface, whether it be a screen or whether it be a report, just because we got this data from some other source where it was given to us with trailing zeros. And so, of course, we could, anywhere we use this, if we have 6 different places in the code where we use this, then we would need to go and put some type of logic like I don't know, val 0. Let's see, if we know we have 6 coming in, let's trim those. And so if that's what we want, let's run this test again. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll trim up to 6. And so let's just do that. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Programming with Palermo is brought to you by Clear Measure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their software with confidence in Azure. If your team has a project that's too important to be delayed or derailed, Clear Measure can help, while keeping your team in the driver's seat and growing in capability. Click on clearmeasure.com for more information. If you are an architect or .NET engineer aspiring to become an architect, check out clearmeasure.com/careers. Now, back to the show.
4. And if we have 4 places in our application that use that data field, then we have to put this 4 different times in our application. We have to put this trimming logic. Now, obviously, we don't want to have this scattered all over our application. So the next thing we think we might do is, well, let's make a component, a UI component that wraps this, and then put the trim logic there so that we don't have repetitive formatting in lots of different places in our application. So what might that look like? We can go say new UI component, and I've already, of course, created this, but if we have 4, and let me show you what this UI component looks like. Okay. Very simple. It could be whatever it is, but it's just going to have this. And if I was just going to mirror it, be that way. And then we call toString on it, and it's like that. I mean, if you're in Blazor or Angular or ASP.NET or whatever UI component logic, but just it's another object that encapsulates the logic. Now, I don't like that either because we still have to go everywhere that value is used and remember not to actually use the decimal object, but to wrap it in something specific. And if we forget to do that, well, then we have a bug because we have these trailing zeros. What I would really like to do is just have it be just like this. So every grid, every component that puts something somewhere, even CSV or Excel file creators, I just want to be able to pass the value. I want to be able to pass the primitive and have it do what I want it to do. I want to actually have it be a decimal, but I want to actually refactor this logic into the type system. So let's see how we might do that. Well, I already have this type done, but let me we have a trimmed decimal. Okay, so trimmed val equals val. All right, and now anywhere that this guy goes around, I can just toString is going to be called implicitly. Console.WriteLine, by the way, console.WriteLine accepts a string, a double, all these types. So I'm calling toString because I don't want it to latch on to the decimal part of it. It's just a console WriteLine thing, not anywhere else. All right. And so what does this do? How are we able to take a decimal and assign it to another object and the compiler is perfectly happy? Let me run this test and just show you that the compiler actually is happy. It did the trimming, and it's called implicit operators. So let's jump into our trimmed decimal and see what we have here. All right, this is a class, and it has some other things that we're not gonna kind of go into, like comparable. If we want to be able to sort by it. And by the way, if you're using .NET 7, check out the new numeric generic interface. It has some of the new C# static overrides or static implementations. But for .NET 6 and below, and of course, this is a .NET 7 project, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. Of course, we have some compare to, we have some equal. If you've ever created a custom type, this will be familiar to you. And I even have some operators here, equal. Whenever you start to make your own operators or make a primitive object, you need to implement all these operators. But I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to look at these implicit operators. Okay, so check this out. Public static implicit operator decimal. And of course, we have implicit operator trim decimal and passing in decimal. That means that anywhere in C#, if I want to assign a trimmed decimal to a decimal, then the compiler knows to call this method, or effectively to call this method. Or if I want to assign a decimal into a trimmed decimal, it knows to call this particular method that calls the constructor. Okay, same thing with an integer, same thing with a float, and then it just does the conversion. Okay, so think about that power, and then scroll to the top. The only actual logic is toString, and you can see this is the formatter that we put in. Everything else is boilerplate primitive type operators. Okay, which when you create your own custom primitives, you need to put all the operators that you think you're going to need. So that's why this is here. But what it does is it allows me to treat trim decimal as a decimal. I get to assign it directly. Okay, and look at there's the little icon that ReSharper is giving me. Implicit conversion of val from decimal to trim decimal, and it works just fine. So I have some tests. And by the way, anytime you create any logic, you want your unit tests. So here's a test case that I have an array of all kinds of different number formats, from 1 trailing 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then all trailing zeros. And then we have a helper method. We assert the decimal is shortened. And then of course we have compare logic verification, because I have all of the other operators, less than, and equal to. And then I have tests, and I'm just going to pass through the comparison because we're not talking about comparison operators. We're talking about implicit operators today. Should convert to float, from float, to int32, from int32. And of course, on the double case, we want to be able to convert to a regular decimal from a trim decimal. And then the comparisons should work just fine back the other way. And then from decimal, I want to be able to take a raw decimal and just assign it to a trim decimal and have that work. And then, of course, the first test here verified our toString logic and verified that all the different cases worked. So that's basically all it takes. And if I go again into trim decimal, I've also done comparable, which gives me a lot more. But if I just want an object that wraps a decimal, that again keeps the value of it inside of it. If I want to, in this case, if I want to leave it as public, I could make it private. But I'm basically creating my stand-in for a primitive, and I'm making life easier all around the rest of the application, because data coming in that I want to do just a little bit with, I can customize my type system. And so when you think about the onion architecture mindset that I've spoken about quite a bit in the past, we're keeping our dependencies and our libraries out to the outside of our application at arm's length, because they change. We don't want them causing ripple effects. And then we're taking the core concepts or the essence of what this application is, and the concepts and the data types that this application owns, and we're pulling those concepts as far into the center of our application as we can. And the very middle of our application is the data types, is the object, is the model that we choose to create to represent the world that our application lives in. And so if one of these pieces of data in our model is a decimal, but it's not just a generic, it's not a C# decimal only. It's a decimal with trimmed zeros. And so we need the most specific types as we can get our hands on. And oftentimes that means we want to take a primitive and effectively create a custom primitive. And this is how we do that. So hope that helps. Well, you can subscribe to Programming with Palermo anywhere that you get video podcasts or on YouTube. Just search for, quote, Programming with Palermo, and you can get more of this content. Today, we talked about one very specific engineering practice within the clear measure way, within the tenet of speed and moving fast. We've already achieved quality. We've established that. We've achieved stability in our production environment, and we want to accelerate the pace that we're going. And so one of the engineering practices that helps with the speed of the team is refactoring. And a specific refactoring is pulling logic into the center of our object model. And so we want to, in this case, refactor the logic of trimming trailing zeros into our object model, where we might be pulling data from data sources outside the application. And one of the concepts for a particular type of decimal is a trimmed decimal. And so instead of littering multiple toString methods with string formatters in various parts on the edge of our application in our user interface or exporting to Excel, we want to take that concept that we want to apply to that data type, regardless of what value is put into it. And so we're refactoring that logic into the center of our object model by creating a custom primitive, and in this case, a trimmed decimal. And implicit and explicit operators are our friend, and it makes it where anywhere we use that particular decimal anywhere in our application, the rest of the .NET ecosystem just treats it as a decimal. But whenever we're converting it to string or other conversions, our own code gets a chance to operate on that value. So hope that helps. God bless.
You've been watching Programming with Palermo, your primary place for highly productive programming protocols and practices. Remember, you have what it takes. You can do this. You are a programmer, formed by God Himself and called to this profession for a purpose. You can catch every episode at Palermo.network as well as syndicated locations nationwide. We're so glad you tuned in. Until next time, may God bless you, and thanks for Programming with Palermo. Programming with Palermo has made a special arrangement with Marketplace Chaplains. Besides programming challenges, we all face issues in life where we need some help. If you'd like, you can call a chaplain confidentially. To speak with a gentleman, dial 512-923-8178. Or to speak with a lady, dial 512-619-6950. The show won't know you called, and everything is kept in strict secrecy. This is a free service, available if you or a friend need it.